If you've been paying attention to the financial markets, you know that right now is really weird. And right now, something has just recently happened which is kind of interesting. You see, Ray Dalio, the billionaire hedge fund manager and philanthropist who served as a co-chief investment officer at Bridgewater Associates since 1985, has been making some really interesting moves with the market as we know. So there's 2 or 3 main things I want to cover in this video, because as a person who's in the financial markets, as a subscriber, or just someone who's watching by, you definitely want to pay attention to these, because what the rich are doing, you definitely want to make sure that you're also doing too. So what has Ray Dalio been doing that has caught my eye? So one move that Ray Dalio has recently done, well, let's not say Ray Dalio himself because that would just be fake news. Well, Ray Dalio's investment firm, Bridgewater Investments, are basically going to put, well, they have put $400 million in gold. Now, when they did this, it was very interesting because you had a lot of people who instantly saw this news and thought, wow, this means that gold is probably right now the best asset class, since we're seeing a surge in price of the gold. And if you're also seeing billionaires start to move majority of their capital into this asset, you would think that this is an asset that you would want to hold. However, if we put things into perspective, this isn't as crazy as it seems. Although yes, on paper they invested $400 million into gold, this isn't that crazy, because if we look at Bridgewater's actual fund, you can see that Bridgewater actually manages $160 billion in assets. So that means that that's actually just a very, very small amount. In fact, that's not even a lot of their money, if we're being honest. So that just means that they're testing the waters to see where the market is actually going. And this doesn't mean that they're actually hedging with gold. This just means that, for example, someone who makes 100k a year, that means they probably bought like $300 worth of gold. So I wouldn't panic and think that gold is, of course, the best asset to have right now. But at the end of the day, it is always good to have a precious metal with a finite resource to try and protect you against some of the inflation currently being experienced right now by the Federal Reserve continuing to print absurd amounts of money. In addition to this, in the investing game, the rules may no longer apply. Additionally, Ray Dalio warns that the Federal Reserve has actually artificially propped up the markets, with traditional valuation metrics no longer telling the entire story. And he thinks there's a risk that the US dollar will be displaced as the global reserve currency. He said, "The capital markets are not free markets, allocating resources in the traditional ways. The economy and the markets are driven by the central banks in coordination with the central government." Even though he believes that the unprecedented stimulus was justified, he argues that these actions have consequences, including an explosion of central banks' balance sheets, as well as price to earnings ratios that exceed 40. So, what should investors do? Dalio recommends investors diversify portfolios across different asset classes that tend to hold up well regardless of the economic landscape, and never try to time the market. I mean, Ray Dalio does know his stuff. Since his first investment at the age of 12, when he purchased $300 worth of Northeast Airlines shares and tripled his money, he's actually honed his craft. He even went on to found one of the largest hedge funds in the world, and it's got around $160 billion worth of earnings. So let's be honest, if we're gonna listen to someone, it's gotta be him. And I'm not gonna lie, right now, advice is very, very speculative, considering we haven't really treaded on these waters before, because even though a global pandemic has happened before, it hasn't happened under the circumstances on which we're seeing now. The Federal Reserve hasn't ever had to print so much money in such a short amount of time in response to a global pandemic before, and we haven't seen them pull out such measures in order to protect or prop up the stock market, which, to be honest, isn't really based on real valuations of the companies anymore. I mean, Tesla shares broke $2,000 already, and the company doesn't really make that much money. So right now, are we in a bubble? It's very difficult to say. But what I would say is that whatever we are in, whether it be a bubble, whether it be a recession, whether it be just before the next economic collapse, I would say definitely diversify your portfolio if you haven't already. This is something that not only Ray Dalio has said, but something that is a staple rule when it does come to investing and managing your assets. You never want to be over leveraged in a position, because if one of your assets contains 90% of your portfolio, you will be in a sticky situation if that asset does underperform.